Welcome to Hello Therapy, a podcast to help you take charge of your mental health through evidence-based psychological tips and tools straight from the therapy room so that you can live life better. Do you just feel completely depleted and burnt out? This week, I am chatting with Dr Claire Plumbly, a clinical psychologist and director of Good Therapy Limited, a psychological therapy centre based online and in Taunton in Somerset in the UK. Claire's debut book, Burnout, How to Manage Your Nervous System Before It Manages You, is out in the UK on the 18th of July. So whether you're on the brink of burnout or you're already feeling its effects, this episode is literally packed with practical advice and therapy room insights to help you regain balance and reclaim your well-being. Dr. Claire Plumbly, thank you so much for joining me on the Hello Therapy podcast.
Thanks for having me.
We are going to be talking about all things burnout today, aren't we? Because it's a subject that I think lots of people talk about amongst themselves, but it's difficult to kind of get into the detail. And I think that's what we need to do. So do you want to start by telling our listeners a bit about who you are and what you do?
Yep. So I'm Claire Plumbly and I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm based down in Taunton in Somerset, the UK. And have a practice that's based both locally and online, and I have a group of associates. So we work under Good Therapy Limited. And yeah, I've got lots of experience with trauma, anxiety, burnout, and I work with CBT and EMDR therapies. So lots to offer this subject. And recently, probably my proudest kind of achievement in recent years is that I've written a book, and that's out on the 18th of July, all about this topic. So it's Burnout, How to Manage Your Nervous System Before It Manages You.
And I had the pleasure of having a little sneak peek at the book, and it is brilliant. So let's define burnout, first of all. How do you see burnout? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people kind of intuitively know that the exhaustion element of burnout. And like you say, a lot of people spend a lot of time using that word to describe what they're going through and also questioning, do I have burnout? Don't I have burnout? But so there is an official definition according to the World Health Organization, and they call it an occupational phenomenon. And that it's a set of difficulties, 3 difficulties I'll run through in a sec, when there's unmanaged chronic workplace stress. So the drawback to this official definition, of course, is that we tend to understand workplace and occupational kind of wording as meaning in paid work. But this then invalidates the experience of millions of people in unpaid roles and the fact that people in paid roles also have a lot of unpaid work as well. So now there's a lot of research into areas such as parental burnout, informal carer burnout, student burnout, athlete burnout. And these are all really important areas that we need to be learning more about. But the 3 main domains will still show up, maybe in slightly different formats, but they'll still show up for these areas. So if I just run through what they are.
Yeah, great.
So you've got the kind of physical and emotional exhaustion as the first. So this when you kind of feel completely wrung out and hollow, like you just don't have your full repertoire of emotions anymore. You're just kind of running on that kind of more cynical or irritable level or just feel empty. So this is the first one. Second one is known as disconnection. Christina Maslach, who first did a lot of work that made the official definition what it is today, she called this detached concern and was part of the reason she started to do so much work into this area, because she saw this in health professionals and giving kind of professions, this detached concern. So this is when you just feel disconnected from the people, maybe your work, maybe feeling like you're on autopilot. You might get that kind of brain fog or feeling a bit zoned out. So in therapy, we often call that dissociation, and this is kind of the milder end of that. The third domain is reduced personal accomplishment. So this is when you're kind of getting those thoughts like, oh, I'm a rubbish mum or doctor or therapist, whatever you do, nothing you do is good enough. And you might also just be kind of coasting. So you're kind of masking how little you're functioning, because especially if you've been in your job a while, you've got lots of ways of just getting on with things without really being connected to what you're doing. So you might end up cutting corners and actually doing a poorer job than you did when you were really connected and in the present moment with it. So those are the three domains. And then, of course, the impact of that is on things like your sleep, your appetite, your social connections, unhealthy coping strategies for managing the intensity of all of this, like drinking, junk food, scrolling on the internet. So that's a kind of whistle-stop tour.
Yeah, and that's a lot, isn't it? There's a lot of signs and symptoms of burnout, and they are different for different people, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's part of what I cover in my book is there's like updated, there's so much research on burnout. It's kind of sifting through it and working out what's useful for people was part of the challenge for writing my book. But I do include a table of 12 symptoms according to a piece of research done in Australia, because what they did was they interviewed over 1,000 people in both paid and unpaid roles, which I think was particularly helpful. And they pulled out which are the things that people mostly complain about. I haven't actually got that table right in front of me, but I remember exhaustion was up at the top. But the fact there were 12 different symptoms as part of that just goes to show how varied it is. All within the realm of stress unmanaged, just tipping into burnout.
So that was going to be my next question around stress, because again, stress is something that we all experience to varying degrees, isn't it? How is burnout different from stress, would you say?
Well, stress in and of itself isn't bad for us. We are designed to cope with stress, and actually we can get lots of positive experiences of stress when it's associated with things we're passionate about and enjoy doing. If you think about what's happening on a physiological level, we're switching from our green rest and digest mode into our sympathetic mode. So we're accessing much more energy and motivation to go and do the things where the extra demands are coming in on us. And so our bodies shift gear and can do that for a period of time quite successfully. And actually there are some short-term benefits to stress, like on our immunity and our sharper cognitive functioning. So, and we get a buzz from it as well when it's good. So that's called eustress. But obviously that's not how we're designed for the long term. So all those shifting gear kind of processes in our body are called allostatic changes. And if that goes on for too long, then that load gets too much because our bodily functions aren't designed for that gear. So our digestive system shifts, for example. And so this causes us problems in the longer term where we're not digesting our food properly. So all these kind of have a very strong knock-on effect on us in lots of different ways. That's just one example. And so how I write about it in my book is if you imagine that your stress response is you playing a game of tennis against a tennis ball machine that's firing a ball at you. And then when another stress comes in, so maybe that's, something at work that's stressful, and then another tennis ball machine is rolled in, and this is like problems at home with your child. Another ball machine rolls in, and this is like your parents getting elderly and needing extra. Suddenly you've got like a whole plethora of ball machines firing balls at you, and there's no escape out of here. This is like your tennis court has like got no escape route. Maybe your efforts are hit the balls quicker, respond quicker, running around like a very frenetic person. And so if our attempts to try and fix and solve and escape the stresses go unmet or fail rather, then we can tip into that kind of shutdown. All we've got left is to curl into a ball and avoid the pain of being hit. And so I use the polyvagal theory to understand this in terms of the more dorsal shutdown. And I think people in burnout oscillate between these kind of sympathetic and dorsal kind of responses in their nervous system. And it's almost like your gears aren't moving smoothly anymore, certainly aren't going back to that reset place, which we need to replenish, fill up, reconnect, do all these things that we know are really helpful, but we just can't get there.
And that's certainly something that I see in my work. I think I tend to see clients when they are in the shutdown mode and they just can't take it anymore. There's been so much stress over a long period of time that they are then in burnout. And then from a therapy perspective, you might need to also deal with things like alcohol use and unhelpful coping strategies, as well as the sort of original stress and burnout And it can
Totally.
be quite tricky to untangle everything, can't it? I don't know if you found that in your work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's knowing where to start, which is going to make the
Yeah.
biggest kind of impact on quality of life. But definitely agree with you that starting with those like basic building blocks that are impacting on like your physiology, like alcohol and sleep, they're
Yeah.
usually agreed that they need to be the first things.
And you talk in the book about sort of 3 types of burnouts. Can you say a bit
Oh
more about
yeah.
that? Because I thought that was really interesting.
I found that really interesting too, because it validates that it's not a one size fits all. So this came from some research in the 80s by a professor called Barry Farber into therapist and teacher burnout. And what he found that were frenetic burnout, under challenged burnout, and worn out burnout. So frenetic comes from that kind of workload pattern where, as I've just described, there's too few resources to pull on. And so you become very frenetic in your behaviors, very busy, trying to just move through it all quicker. And this you might find particularly what he said is problematic where there's new staff, for example, in a new role.
Trying to prove
Yeah, exactly.
that,
Yeah.
yeah.
And in fact, it's interesting. I was talking to somebody about this type, and she was telling me that she was given a book very on in her career that basically told you to behave like that. Like, this is how you move up the career ladder. And that is kind of the
Right.
advice that we might have all heard. Like, just go beyond. Like, for us as psychologists, like, be an unpaid assistant and all of these things. Like, just
Go the extra mile.
Yes, exactly. So the second one is more under challenge burnout. So this is as a result of when your work's monotonous and not kind of stretching you in that interesting way. So you're lacking the variety, and research suggests there's a different trajectory through the 3 domains that I described at the start of this podcast for each of these 3. I definitely recognized this in myself when I worked in private practice and wasn't doing anything else other than seeing my clients, one-to-one clients. So I realized I thought this would be a really good thing to kind of develop my specialism and just kind of go deep. And then I quickly found that actually, apart from just always being with other people's distress, which is also intense, I was also feeling like I wasn't using my other skills. And so I think, what I write about in the book is that people in those jobs where they are well educated and high achieving can struggle with this quite a bit as well.
I really resonate with that, Claire, actually, because I was just thinking there about, I think that's where I was at when I started this podcast 4 months ago, or whatever it is now. That kind of sense of like, I want to do a bit more. I want to do something different. I think we're probably all at risk of feeling under challenged at points.
Yeah, I agree. And has the podcast helped to alleviate that?
Absolutely, but it's kind of turned into its whole other thing.
Frenetic one.
Yeah. No, but it's been great. But I guess that's thinking about someone who is in that space of feeling really under challenge, and there isn't any opportunity to do new things and other things. I think we're really privileged, aren't we, to be in a job where we can do so many different things, but that's not the same for everyone else.
Yes, and of course, in therapy, you might be looking for those opportunities where they might not have presented themselves very easily, like around other areas of life. So there's a third one, which is worn out burnout. And this is more around where your work isn't aligned with your values. You might be being asked to do things that don't feel good. Again, with my own work experience of this in the NHS, when I was being asked to see 25 clients a week. So when I first started that job, I was expected to see 15 as a full-time equivalent clients a week. And it went up to 25 within the course of a year or so. It was really quite quick when a new service operation rolled out. And so I was asked to see clients for fewer sessions, for less time. I had less time to plan the sessions and less time to have conversations with other therapists, as peer supervision. So, I felt really misaligned with what I was able to offer and what I wanted to offer. So, I mean, I think that's really interesting. And I've definitely also seen it in many other people where, they might not struggle to understand, like, I'm not overburdened with extra stuff. So it doesn't kind of add up that I'm burnt out. But actually, here I am being asked to do some really rubbish stuff and I'm not really producing what I feel I'd like to.
And that can also have a real impact on your mood as well, can't it? Like any sort of type of burnout, I suppose. But I think
Yeah.
especially that one where you're not doing what you feel deep down is important to you and is meaningful to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And alongside the sort of having, the three types of burnout, you also talk in the book about stages. And again, this is something that I come across a lot, but I think it'd be really useful for people to know or to have an idea of what the stages can look like, or those stages that you don't progress from one to the other. I think you talk about a continuum, which again is important, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, so there's a few different stage models, and there's one that's a
Yeah.
12-stage model of burnout. And I was umming and ahhing whether to put one in, but I thought actually what I found helpful about the 5-stage model is that it shows you the progression from not stress to then after stress, what that looks like, which is, I think, helpful for going, okay, what's going on with me? So you can check in with yourself. And yeah, but I think you can oscillate up and down, not necessarily just progress one to another. But yeah, so the first is called the honeymoon phase, which kind of, as you might imagine, is the moments when you're throwing yourself into a project. I'm sure that's probably happened a little bit with your podcast. I don't know. When I
No,
get
not
in,
at all, Claire.
you're just super enthusiastic, saying yes to all the opportunities. I definitely experienced this at the start of anything new when I'm saying,
Yeah.
what I've got so many ideas and opportunities
Mm.
kind of come from those. So if you are recognizing that, then the trick there is to start pacing yourself, trying to just create some pauses, trying to delegate, um, because if not, it progresses to phase two, which is the
Yeah.
onset of stress. So that's when you start to, the body's changing into those
Mm.
stress responses I talked about earlier. And physiologically, that might mean more tension, your racing thoughts. You might feel that you're noticing worries, impatience, a real urge to fix and solve everything kind of immediately. So if you're in this place, it's very tempting to think, I'm just going to keep working through it and get to the end. But of course, a lot of life isn't like that. The more you do,
No.
the more you generate to do in a way. So it's, if you're noticing that, using this podcast maybe as an opportunity to just check in and start doing some of the stress relief things that you might have done in the past, that how, like, stop prioritizing work, remembering to prioritize self-care, even if you don't feel like you need to, like thinking about
Yeah.
what you need. Then it moves on to the third, which is chronic stress. So essentially, all little niggles are kind of really kind of setting in at this point.
Mhm.
And this can impact in terms of what we've already covered. So the body, like your sleep, tension aches, like, become very hard to ignore. Your Any pre-existing physical health issues might really rear their heads, like
Mhm.
migraines, IBS, that kind of thing. Your emotions are the fight and flight emotions, so quite irritable, frustrated easily. People might not want to come near you because of how you are,
Yeah.
getting more anxious and feeling really overwhelmed. And behaviors, rest just feels almost impossible, like your body can't wind down and like it's an
Mhm.
unnecessary thing that I can't make time for. You're overthinking everything. And then the unhealthy coping behaviors just ramp up,
Yeah.
which we've already referred to. And this then leads us into burnout. Stage 4 is burnout. But I think of this as like high functioning burnout. So you're kind of
Okay.
still functioning according to what everybody else can see, but you're showing really all the signs now that I
Mm.
described right at the beginning: the physical and emotional exhaustion, that disconnection, and then the reduced personal accomplishment. They're all in there. So, of course, the thing is also with the masking is that other people might not benefit from pointing this out to you, because often you're getting stuff done and holding things together. So it is really important to have a sense of this yourself, because you might need to be stepping in for yourself. Because often, if it gets to stage 5, which is known as habitual burnout, and this is when your body has been like shouting at you for
Mm.
quite a few stages by this point. You need to stop. You need to slow down. Because you've overridden them, your body forces a stop for you. And this is where you'll get people kind of coming, you know, off work to therapy. Whereas in stage 4, they might still be kind of holding things together, but very easily
Okay.
thrown by things or having panic attacks. Now, I've had someone who had NEAD, like non-epileptic attacks disorder, where they
Right.
only have seizures that aren't linked to anything neurological, for example, panic attacks. I've had somebody who, woke up and just couldn't talk. So it can be really quite an intense. And I think maybe sometimes people think of burnout, full like proper burnout being like that level only. But of course, actually, it's on this continuum, as you said.
Mm.
And us as psychologists worry about anybody anywhere on this stress kind of continuum because
Yeah.
none of this is good long term. We're not doing ourselves any favors by just pushing through, which is what often we've been taught to do, not listen to our body, keep pushing through.
Yeah, and that's especially difficult if you are someone who is self-critical or perfectionistic or, has ideas about, wanting to be high achieving. And that's certainly something that Diane Everett and I covered in episode 21, where we were talking very much about high achieving individuals and the sort of environments, the context that you find yourself in. As you say, the external pressures can really ramp up when you are in that kind of burnout phase and you have the blinkers on and I've just got to keep going. But as you say, your body then sort of steps in and says, no, you've got to stop.
And it's such a shock, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people, I think we just feel like we can keep going forever sometimes when in that stage. I mean, when people get to that kind of full on crash and burn type burnout, often that is hopeful for change being something that you might stick at a bit more, I find. But we don't want that. We don't want people to have to crash and burn in order to make the changes. But I suppose it is something that I talk in the last quarter of the book is post burnout growth, because often that's the point at which, in our trauma work, we talk about shattered beliefs because the belief is I can keep going. And so now you've got this new belief, but is taking that, the silver lining from that. Like, what does it mean though? Oh, it means I can engage now in all those other things in life that give it meaning.
Yeah. And I really like that idea of post burnout growth in terms of, as you say, what it means for you in terms of your life in general. So not just this burnout episode, but actually, are there some real fundamental changes that you need to make to your work or your family life or your home life in order to not reach that stage again? And this is sort of making me think about the next question that I wanted to ask you about. Who would you say is most vulnerable to developing burnout, would you say?
I mean, in my book, I talk about parents because, of course, it is particularly parents of young children when the burden of caring is more intense. And if you're not near any support systems, we talk about raising, children in a village, which we don't do anymore. So those are all, it's like thinking about the protective factors that we know help, and what the threats are for them. So, and then same goes for caring for others. When I looked at this, I could see that research suggested that many people who are in those informal caring roles, the needs of the dependent person on them are better met than their own needs a lot of the time. And so, of course, then, and it's such a lonely place as well, quite often, isn't it? It's all about kind of finding community. In my recent work, personally, I've been around a lot of sole traders and entrepreneurs. And I think they're really at high risk because you don't have your boss there saying, when did you last take a holiday? If you have a harsh inner critic, your harsh inner critic is your boss saying like, work harder, do more. And so, if you're not got that awareness, I think a lot of people think I'm going to leave my corporate job or the NHS and move into like working for myself or be my own boss and I'll be in charge of my own time. But actually the reality is you need to maybe pause and do some work on how you're going to self-care before you leap into that. Otherwise we take all those other patterns with us from those places.
That's a really interesting point, isn't it? And I guess sort of thinking about people who are self-employed, just generally, when you're self-employed, the buck stops with you and you have to bring the money in. Like there's a lot of hats that you have to wear as a self-employed person, particularly if you're sort of on your own and you're starting out, and you don't have financial backing. Like it's really, really hard to not get into that frenetic I've got to sort of do everything and make sure the money's coming in so that I can pay the mortgage type mindset. And I think especially just from thinking about psychologists and therapists in particular, if you have come out of the NHS, I think I certainly went through a frenetic kind of, yeah, I've got to really work at this. And
I know. And I think the kind of conversations that I've noticed in forums with other psychologists and coaches and therapists who at that point of transitioning or maybe been doing their own private practice for a year or two is that you kind of, the work builds up gradually and then you hit this point where you haven't got the back systems to kind of carry you into the next phase where, like you say, you might be then wearing more hats because the business is built. And I notice there's a resistance to investing money in becoming more boundaried with how you do that. So, for example, I realized I needed to kind of invest in a PA at one point, and I needed to invest in another inbox from incoming referrals and like using Trello and like all the kind of extra kind of, so boundaries is something I know that we're going to like just drop in on later on about like, what you can do. But the fact that you might have to invest in boundaries, it's a little bit annoying. It's a bit like, I think, having a fence around your house that has to be invested in order for it to carry on doing its job, like keeping the others out and your property safe. But we do have to pay for those annoying things, and it is worthwhile doing, and just thinking about that.
Yeah. And I think how you think about that as well is important, because if that's creating stress for you, then that's just adding to the burnout feeling. So again, a bit of a perspective shift around this, actually, even though this is costing me money, taking away from the what I need to feed my family, it's actually going to help in the long run. So having that longer term view, I think.
Yeah. And valuing yourself, that you are worth that investment as well, which can be really hard for some people, especially when they've come from difficult life experiences. That
definitely, yeah. And just to pick up your point about carers, because I worked a lot with carers in my NHS role, working with people with dementia, and carer stress was something that was discussed a lot and people knew a lot about, but nobody really ever talked about the idea of burnout as a carer. We talked about mental health of carers, but burnout as a concept, I think, is quite interesting within the sort of carer realm. But it happens a lot.
Yeah, and I do include a reference for a measure around that as well, because I think it's sometimes helpful to go and look at measures to see, some of them are paid. The Maslach one is paid, but I think the other ones are all free, because then you can see what are the different signs and symptoms and where am I on here, and it can just be quite validating.
So we've touched on, I guess, some of the roles that people might have that might sort of lead them into a burnout situation. Can you say a little bit about early experiences or childhood experiences, and just kind of broad brush? I know that when we were talking about this episode, we went down a rabbit hole with it a little bit, didn't we, in terms of where we could go with it. But just a general sense of in terms of your understanding around what might make someone vulnerable in terms of their life experiences so far.
Yeah, because I think I separate it out in the book to external pressures on us, which are the things we've just been talking about, like demands on our time, on our energy, not having enough resources and things like this, and not having control. There's quite a few that we go into. And then the internal pressures, and I kind of divide it up into three, I think I see a lot: perfectionism, people pleasing, and avoiding emotions. And tracing these internal pressures back, there's all sorts of different things that might feed into this, but it is worthwhile if people feel like, so there's different layers you might do burnout work, and this might be going into the deeper levels, which you might not be ready for immediately in your burnout journey, but to consider it for the long-term health of your and well-being. So things like people who have had very strict messages about schooling, education and achievement, this kind of fixed mindset rather than a growth mindset, which just means that I can either do something or I can't. It's not something I can grow. And if you have parents who weren't attuned to your needs, they basically didn't meet your emotional needs for whatever reason, maybe beyond their own control. Maybe they were workaholics and expected to, achieve a lot, or maybe there was other pressures on you and your family, like culturally, or moving house, or maybe immigrating. All of these types of things will put a lot of pressure on families and can impact on a parent's ability to be there for their children. And this can lead to different attachment styles. Again, that's a whole extra episode in itself if we want to go into it. But the nuts and bolts of that is that it can cause us to get caught up in this insecure striving, where we're trying really hard to prove ourselves as competent and not somebody who will be a failure or abandoned. So this underpins the kind of more perfectionist kind of pattern. And then it can also fuel this kind of people pleasing where we're striving to please and keep ourselves thought of well in the eyes of others. So our self-worth is very dependent on being able to do all the things that we think they want, putting our own needs last. And of course, all of this can impact on our ability to be attuned to our emotions and can make negative emotions in particular very frightening for people. And so work is such an easy escape. Like we can stay busy and distracted. And of course, the more we work, the more we achieve, the more socially that is seen as a success. So again, we're then higher on a pedestal and we feel safe. Our threat mode isn't being as triggered. So those are some of the things that there's more to say about it. But yeah, some of the messages that we grow up with will inform our relationship with work.
And I think something that I reflect on with people is someone who's had those types of experiences, or maybe is a people pleaser or a bit of a perfectionist, etc. When they do collapse from burnout or they're off work, the act of having to go off work just can sometimes feel quite traumatic for someone. Because their self-worth is so tied in with what they produce, how far up the career ladder they are. And there has to be almost like in therapy, a bit like a stripping back of the person so that they can really get to who they are without the distraction of work, you know?
Yeah, and that's where revisiting values is so important, and coming back to the fact that there's probably domains of your life you've not considered. Work's just become the only domain that, you're giving any energy and thought to.
Yeah.
And so you can live a much fuller life if you give yourself the opportunity to do that.
So we've talked about what burnout is and all the different stages and types and things, which I think has been really useful. But shall we shift gears to what someone can do? So I want to take two scenarios. The first scenario being someone who is recognizing that they're starting or they are in the burnout process, let's say, versus someone who has had the collapse, who's sort of burned and crashed, as it were. So what can the person who is acknowledging, okay, I am in burnout or I'm approaching burnout, what can that person do to help themselves?
So, I mean, in the book, I talk about quite early on some tools for trying to tune into where you are in your nervous system. So you can do some practical somatic things to kind of calm and reset. Because you can't really do anything if you're not tuned in and have some awareness of how your body is responding.
Yeah.
Because in an ideal world, what I would be saying is, well, you need to stop and rest and pace yourself. But I think if you say that someone in the throes of burning out, they'll be like, well, yeah, sure, I need to do that, but I'm not gonna. So it's just really hard. So I think you need to tend to some calming tools, which I teach in the book, to help you begin that process. It's tricky. And then we're going to talk here a bit about the 3 systems model, because I know that's also something you use in your therapy, which comes from compassionate mind therapy and is one I really love. So to explain about that, the idea is that you've got these 3 systems of regulating the emotion. So we've got emotional drive for safety, which is a threat. And in burnout, that's become really overinflated with all the things being asked of us, not enough resources and things like this. So that's that sympathetic and dorsal, both kind of in there. And the second one is the drive that moves us towards resources. So that might be, basic resources for survival, like food and things, but also social status. And that's the stuff that's kind of, again, got a little bit overinflated. And we've overused this. It's coming from a place of threat. We're moving from the threat into the drive and back again. It's kind of, there is exactly. And there's a third system called the soothing system, which is kind of often for lots of people, I get them to draw out their 3 systems. Is that what you do? And often they're like, oh, yes, it's a little dot over here. But the purpose of this system, why we have it, is for soothing, resting, recuperating, replenishing our resources, social connection. We can't function without that, but we're not taught that, and it's not valued in our culture. So trying to get people to start moving in a certain direction, so they're going from threat to soothing before trying to access drive, rather than just going, nah, I don't need the soothing. I'm just going to keep doing this stuff over here, which is like achieving and doing, because
Yeah.
once you do that, not only do you resettle, but you're actually doing a better job over in Drive because your IQ's at its full functionality. You've got better access to your decision making and reasoned decisions. There's so much benefit cognitively that happens when we do this. So yeah, so I talk to people about what that might look like, and it's all individual for different people.
Yeah.
But this is a helpful kind of guide for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, and I have lots of conversations about how you can switch on your soothing system. And I think often where people's minds go is to, oh, well, I've just got to do mindfulness. And then they kind of roll their eyes and go, oh, I hate doing mindfulness, or I can't do it, or I can't clear my mind. Like all those kind of things show up. But switching on the soothing system is much more than, well, mindfulness can be one way that you can do it, but there's lots of different ways, and using your five senses, isn't it? And as you say, this kind of somatic work, and it can be really simple things as well, like carrying an essential oil in your bag and just
Yeah.
having a sniff, like that can bring on a sense of calm and balance.
Exactly. And I encourage people in the book to put together their personal kit. So they've got it there. I've always done this in therapy. I'm sure you have. It's, originally kind of all stemmed from work for people who are highly traumatized. But actually, I think there's more understanding that it's really helpful for anyone. And then, thinking about the transition points in your day as being the time to do the check-in, because often, when you're closing your computer down for the day, or you're about to get out of the car to get the kids from school, you're about to sit down for dinner, if you just crash from one thing to another, you're kind of expecting your body to do everything in the same gear, but everything takes a different level of energy and cognitive function. And if you can just take that time then to pause and either use like your essential oils that you say, or take some breaths, or just do something to kind of stretch you won't really know if you don't listen in what you need. But I think people sometimes want or hope for bigger, cleverer answers than this kind of back to basic stuff. But humans are mammals. We're made to kind of be in tune with our bodies, and we're not, because our culture doesn't invite us to do that. It almost invites us to be very disconnected from our bodies.
100%, especially when we could go down this rabbit hole of social media, but I think, we are very much encouraged to just scroll and disconnect and almost not be aware that we have a body that needs managing. And it's those micro moments, I call those micro moments, the kind of just taking those 30 seconds, as you say, in between transitions in your day, alongside the noticing, alongside the checking in. Again, really simple, but can be really powerful.
The other thing is to think about what longer term things need to be put in place for self-compassion for yourself as well, because yes, the soothing system is important. We do need to spend time and energy in getting that back up to its full capacity if it's running on empty. But also self-compassion is about doing some things that might be hard, but are good for us in the long term. So that might be having those tricky conversations with the boss about realistically not being able to do all the shifts that they want you to do. Or it might be about saying to a family member, you need to be a bit more around the house doing these things. This is your job. Or can you pick the kids up from school? We do find it often quite hard to ask, but, compassion, which I talk about as being really important for overcoming burnout in the book, allowing support in is a really important flow of compassion. It's not just about showing ourselves compassion, allowing ourselves to show compassion to others, but also allowing it in.
Yeah. That could be really challenging for some people, can't it? Especially if you are like a bit of a people pleaser or a bit perfectionistic, where actually receiving care or support just goes against everything that you do normally. And I think in therapy that can take a bit of work, can't it? Cognitively, like looking at the beliefs around that.
Yeah, totally. It can take a bit of time to practice that and get there. And, people who need it most often really dislike it most because it's so unfamiliar. And lots of thoughts will show up like, I don't deserve it. I need to be the strong one. I'm the responsible one. I can't, and all skills can be practiced. It's the same for skills around emotion regulation and anxiety and burnout. It's just like learning an instrument or a foreign language. It just takes regular practice.
Yeah. So someone that is in the collapse bit, let's say off work, and just is exhausted and and has stopped functioning, perhaps. So what would you say to someone who's experiencing that type of burnout?
So in some ways, quite often that means that space has been created already. So it's kind of a helpful place to be in, that you're not pushing against all the things that are still coming at you because they've probably stopped. But if they haven't, maybe just getting someone out, delegating that out if you can't function to do it,
Yeah.
or putting the out of office on, saying indefinitely, crisis at home or whatever it is, getting that support around you to support moving in that direction. Then just, if you are in paid work, making sure you've been signed off and taking as much time as you can. I know that's really hard because things will be building up, but you really do need to pay attention to the fact that this happened and it can take a long time to get back up. Like, we're talking about months or even years to get back up if people really do crash a burn like this. So you need to give yourself permission to do this. And then all the cheat things that you might have thought, I can't do that. I'm doing cheat with inverted commas, for anyone listening. That's like the ready meals, the accepting of help and lifts, all these things that you thought, I can't do that. Now is the time. You're just going to have to do it. And then it's just about keeping yourself into some sort of regular routine that is going to start building you back up, building your strength and resilience and resources back up. I think. I mean, I'd be curious to see where you would go with this, but some sort of small home project, some sort of small exercise, like, depends where someone is with this, doesn't it? If they're listening right now, you kind of, it's hard to know who you're speaking to, but if it's walking the dog, walking a little extra, like, gradually trying to get there. And then in the longer term, once you're over this kind of really heavy, bad place where your mood is very low and you're really struggling to function, that's where you'll kind of want to do some of the work that we've already referred to, like thinking about your values, thinking about what new boundaries you need in place. Like, what does life need to look like for you to function? Thinking that there might be some things you have to give up. Like you mentioned, that there might be some sunk costs that people find hard to imagine giving up, like all the money they've spent on training or employment,
Yeah.
things like this, but actually maybe they're not serving you. So that can be really hard to look in the face of, but it is just how it might be.
And I think what I would add to that is, if someone is listening and they are in that collapse, that you're not the only one, that this happens a lot.
Yeah.
And that I think there's a really key point that you said there, which is it can take a long time to get back to where you were, or even to get to a place where you feel like you're kind of functioning again. And I think there's an acceptance that needs to happen around that actually now the priority is resting, as well as all the things that you just mentioned, but a gradual build up of that stuff is really important.
And it's really hard, isn't it? Because, when someone's physically ill, when I had COVID or had a cold, it's so painful resting because you just want to get on with it. It's boring. And all the guilt and anxiety kind of worries show up. I should be doing this.
Yeah.
People think I'm flaky. I'm lazy. So just to warn people that these thoughts are probably going to come up, that doesn't mean you need to pay attention to them. So you might need to practice letting go of those and trying to write down a few of the things that you need to recenter on when those thoughts come up, which is this rest is going to help me heal. Something like this, that you just need to kind of go, whenever I get those thoughts, that's going to ground me where I'm at right now.
I really like that. And maybe having that as a bit of a mantra that someone can hold on to, this rest is going to help me heal. That's really, really key. What would you say for you might be some of the kind of key takeaways for someone who is either, in the midst of burnout or approaching burnout, or know someone who is burning out? What would you say to that?
I would say that it's not your fault. We live in such a demanding culture. It's everywhere. And a lot of it we are blind to, the number of demands that are on us, in our different roles, based on different things in life, like who we are, our gender, our race. There's so much in there. But as a general rule of thumb, life has got very fast paced, and the opportunities to reset our nervous system aren't as readily available. The things that could help us, social connection, nature, all these things, we are more disconnected to now. So it's not your fault, but it is within your realm to move towards something different here. So it's giving hope really, that it doesn't need to be like this, and actually trying to get someone you can buddy up with or become an accountability partner. There's lots of places where you might find community around this, people who want to prioritize their self-care. So try and find those opportunities, because we're stronger together with other people who have the same wishes and values. And then it's easier then to do the things that you feel like you should be doing, like saying no to an extra shift at work, and go and celebrate that with your group. And it just you with those worry thoughts that I'm not good enough, or I should be doing these things. Yeah, it's hard to sum it all up in one key takeaway, but I guess I'm going to leave that one as the one I'll go with.
It is hard, but you did a great job, Claire. Thank you so much for joining me today. And just a reminder that your book is out on the 18th of July. And it really is a great book. So anyone that is interested in burnout or is in burnout, it's an essential read.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Hello Therapy. If you found it helpful, don't forget to subscribe, follow, and review. You can get more well-being and mental health tips by joining our email list and visiting the resources section of our website at harleyclinical.co.uk. The Hello Therapy podcast and the information provided by me, Dr. Liz White, is solely intended for information and educational purposes and does not constitute personalised advice. Please do reach out to your GP or a mental health professional if you need support. Until next time, take care of yourself.